Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Reyes, and on behalf of the American Lung Association and the Association's National Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, thank you so much for joining our webcast today, focusing on vaping cessation through text messaging for Latino and Hispanic youth. In celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, we are glad to have you all tuned in today to hear about this important topic. To learn more about the ways in which we're observing Hispanic Heritage Month and the various resources we have for Spanish speakers and the Latino and Hispanic community, please visit the link we've just placed in the chat. In a moment, Dr. Francisco Cartageno will present an exciting update on his innovative research project. Our session will be moderated by Dr. Albert Rizzo, Chief Medical Officer for the American Lung Association. But before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to cover. Firstly, this webinar is being hosted live on Microsoft Teams, and it is being recorded. Also, today's session is meant to be interactive. We want to hear from you. To do this, please put your questions in the chat box. And thank you to those who've already sent in your questions in advance. Dr. Cartageno will be answering them at the end of his presentation. Also, for those who want interpretation to Spanish, you can click on Caption Subtitles on CC in your video controls on the bottom of your screen. To change the caption language, select Settings, Caption Subtitles, and choose Spanish or any other language. Para los que desean traducción al español, pueden presionar Caption Subtitles on CC en sus controles de video en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Para cambiar el idioma, seleccione Settings, Caption Subtitles, y seleccione Español. Finally, if we're unable to answer all of your questions, we will be sending out a follow-up email with answers. Now, at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Rizzo.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to moderate today's webinar on such a timely topic. In just a moment, Dr. Cartageno will provide an overview and update on his project, Kick Vaping, a vaping cessation text messaging intervention for Latino and Hispanic young adults. You might find it interesting that while the Latino and Hispanic community generally have a lower prevalence of cigarette smoking, more and more adults and young adults are turning to e-cigarettes and vaping. For years, the commercial tobacco industry has targeted Hispanic Latino communities in ways that have impacted generations. These predatory companies have donated to influential community groups, universities, and colleges, and scholarship programs supporting Hispanic Latino people. To combat this epidemic, the American Lung Association is proud to invest in potentially life-saving research projects through our Catalyst Award research program, of which Dr. Cartageno was our 2020-2021 award recipient. Now, a little bit more about Dr. Cartageno. He was born and raised in Mexico. After attending medical school in Mexico, he decided to pursue a career path in research versus clinical work and landed at the University of Kansas, thanks to a research fellowship. It was there that he met a longtime mentor, Dr. Ana Paula Cupertino, who studied tobacco control among Latinos. This is when he learned that the need for an easily accessible interventional tool such as Kick Vaping was apparent. Here to give us an update on the progress of this project, Kick Vaping, a text messaging intervention, is Dr. Cartageno. Welcome, Dr. Cartageno. The floor is yours. Stand by, some slight technical difficulty. We were just talking a few minutes ago. I wish I knew some good jokes to kill the airtime here. It's going to be well worth waiting for, though. Yeah, it looks like we're trying to get internet connection back for Dr. Cartageno. In addition to today's discussion, we certainly have a lot of vaping information on our website, especially around things such as disparities and its effect on youth. Vicky's lost internet and can't even get through the chat. Are we able to contact him through telephone or text at all? And I'm wondering if he can phone in. Looks like he is back.
Hi, I don't know what happened. My apologies.
No problem.
So am I good to go or?
Yes, you are. Take it away.
Again, sorry for that. The internet connection is not behaving today. So I am Francisco Cartageno. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences at the University of Rochester. And I'm also the assistant director of the Community Outreach and Engagement at Wilmot Cancer Institute. Today's presentation, Vaping Cessation Through Text Messaging for Latino Young Adults, is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion after my presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to walk you through how I landed into doing research on vaping cessation. And everything started a couple of years ago when I started doing research on smoking cessation. And I want to start by letting everybody aware of the disparities that exist when it comes to tobacco use among Latinos. So in this first slide, you can see smoking rates by race, ethnicity, and gender. And you're going to see that some disparities exist. You're going to see that there's a group in where smoking rates are really high, and that is among American Indians with 31%. Then you're going to see that there are two groups in where tobacco use is relatively similar, and that is among whites and blacks. And then you're going to see that there are two groups in where tobacco use is relatively low, and that is among Hispanics or Latinos and Asians with 10 and 9%. So by just looking at this slide, someone may say, smoking is not a priority in the Latino community. Why do we need to do research on this topic? Well, can I have the next slide, please? When we take a closer look among Latinos, we're going to see that some disparities exist even within Latinos by country of birth. And we're going to see that some of those disparities, for example, exist among Cuban and Puerto Ricans, in where smoking rates are as high as 40% in certain groups, like, for example, men between the ages of 50 and 59 among Cubans, and among Puerto Ricans between the Puerto Rican men between the ages of 40 and 49. Another interesting pattern is that smoking rates are not different among men and women among Puerto Ricans, which they're different for the rest of the Latino group. And then we're going to see that there are two groups in where tobacco use is relatively low, for example, Dominicans and Mexicans. However, some interesting phenomena are observed among particularly Mexicans, in where a big proportion of current smokers are what we call non-daily smokers, meaning they don't smoke on a daily basis. So all of these phenomena hopefully build the case on why we need to do research among Latinos. Can I have the next slide, please? And just building more the case, Latinos, we represent 17% of the US population as of right now, but it is expected that by the year 2060, we're going to represent 30% of the US population. Compared to both white and Black individuals, Latinos are less likely to have access to healthcare. Latinos are less likely to be advised to quit smoking. Latinos are less likely to use counseling and medications for smoking cessation. And Latinos are less likely to participate in smoking cessation studies. This is particularly true because of two factors. One of them, not all the studies are available in Spanish. And we know that for studies to reach the Latino community, they need to make them available in Spanish. And also, a lot of studies have these criteria in where smokers need to smoke 10 or more cigarettes per day, which on what I previously described, that is not a pattern for all Latinos. And in the past 20 years, there have only been two large randomized clinical trials addressing smoking among Latinos. One of them I'm going to present in a little bit, but just building on the rationale on all the disparities that exist when it comes to tobacco use among Latinos. The work that I'm going to present today is conducted within a framework in where we involve the community in all aspects of the research, from conceptualizing research ideas to implementing the studies to interpreting findings and disseminating results. So I want to publicly acknowledge each one of them. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So how do we treat smoking? According to the clinical practice guidelines, the combination of counseling and medications is the most effective treatment for treating tobacco use and dependence. Can I have the next slide, please? Throughout the years, my primary mentor, Dr. Ana Paula Cupertino, and I have culturally accommodated an intervention for smoking cessation among Latinos. This intervention started with making phone calls and realizing that that was not the most effective way to reach Latinos. Then we moved all of those protocols into text messages, and we did pilot studies until we refined the intervention, and we finally did a large randomized control trial that I'm going to present the results of. So we conducted this study that we call the CIDE Texto, and the primary aim of this study was to see if this intervention was better than the standard of care. So what does the intervention consist of? Participants receive educational materials, printed educational material, access to nicotine replacement therapies, which are some of the FDA-approved medications for quitting smoking, and a text messaging intervention that provided counseling in both English and Spanish for Latino smokers. So half of the participants received this combination of the intervention. And then the other half of participants were part of the control group, which only consisted of printed educational materials and access to nicotine replacement therapies. We enrolled 457 Latino smokers, and we followed them for 6 months. And can I have the next slide, please? These are just some screenshots on what the intervention looked like. So the text messaging program was tailored to participants' preferences. So we asked participants what were their main reasons to quit smoking, what are some of the triggers they faced, what are some of the coping strategies that they wanted to use whenever they wanted to quit smoking. We helped them to set up a quit date, and we helped them to request nicotine replacement therapies. Can I have the next slide, please? We're very proud to say that our text messaging intervention does a couple of innovative things. One of them is that we do the management of the nicotine replacement therapies through text messages, meaning when someone wants a refill, it is as simple as just texting us, I want more medications, and we send them to them. Everything is mailed, so people don't need to go to a pharmacy to get the medications. And we're also able to troubleshoot if participants are experiencing some side effects like itchiness with the patch. And we do all of this through text messages. We have also developed some algorithms to detect whenever someone has relapse. And if that is the case, we help them to set up a new quit date, and we walk them through the process of trying to quit again. And something we're also very proud of is that our intervention is scored at a 4th grade level in English and as easy, very easy in Spanish. And this is very important whenever we're working with communities from low socioeconomic status. Can I have the next slide? The recruitment of this large study of 457 Latino smokers was guided by the Community Advisory Board that I presented in one of the previous slides. We are very happy to say and report that we were able to recruit a very diverse sample of Latino smokers. We have over 20 Latin American countries represented in the study, and this only talks about how heterogeneous the Latino community is. And the recruitment happened through multiple venues. Every time there was a parent night activity at schools, you will see us there. We were also very fortunate to have a member from Univision as part of our community advisory board. So they were able to invite us to present the study to one of their known TV shows. And every time there was a health fair, you will see us there recruiting for the study. Can I have the next slide? So what are the results? We are very happy to present that participants who received the decided text intervention were significantly more likely than those receiving a standard of care, who were part of the control group, to self-report smoking abstinence at month 6. And this was statistically significant, 34% versus 20%. Which is a huge success. And again, this is only one of 2 large randomized control trials that have happened among Latinos in the past 20 years. So this study is really advancing our field, and hopefully this is an intervention that can reach multiple individuals from the Latino community and also can be accessible to them. Can I have the next slide? So I also want to publicly acknowledge one of the members from the Community Advisory Board. Her name is Diana Bermudez. And although the Community Advisory Board was extremely supportive to all of our smoking cessation efforts, she was the one who was always pushing us to think about vaping. She works at a school district, so it is a very natural concern for her to think about vaping, especially when it comes to youth. So can I have the next slide? So one of the very first things we did with the Community Advisory Board was to see how big of the problem we had. So we conducted a cross-sectional survey among a diverse sample of students in grades 7, 9, and 11, attending public schools in a low-income community. And it was surprising to learn that 19% of the adolescents were already using electronic cigarettes, compared to 6% who were using regular cigarettes. And not only that, we also learned that 55% of the students were susceptible to future vaping, and we did not find any difference by race and ethnicity. So it was very clear that whenever we presented these results to the Community Advisory Board, we needed to do something about it. We needed to do research on how to prevent the use of electronic cigarettes among adolescents, but we also needed to do research on how to help those who are already using it to quit vaping. So what are the interventions at the moment for vaping cessation? I want to give a shout out to the Truth Campaign, because they have been able to prove that there is one intervention that it is effective for helping people quit vaping. And that is a text messaging intervention, and they evaluated the intervention in a large randomized control trial, showing that it is more effective than control. So this is what we should be recommending people to use whenever they want to quit vaping. And again, this is nothing but a great, a major advancement in our field. However, there are a couple of limitations to this study. One of them is that the study had a low representation of Latinos. It was only 10% of participants who self-identified as Latinos, and the intervention was not available in Spanish. So we do not know if this intervention is also applicable, the results of this study are also applicable to Latinos. And this is where we come into the picture. So I am forever grateful with the American Lung Association because of the funding that they have provided us. And they have provided funding to develop an intervention for vaping cessation among Latino young adults. And they have also given us funding not only to develop the intervention, but for it to be pilot tested. So we are also looking into determine the feasibility, acceptability, and the preliminary abstinence rate of this intervention among Latino young adults. Can I have the next slide? So one of the very first things we did, continuing on all the best practices that we have learned from previous studies on smoking cessation, we convened a community advisory board of Latino young adults, and I want to also publicly acknowledge each one of them because of the amazing contributions that they have done to our research effort. Can I have the next slide, please? And what has been their level of involvement in our study? So we took the Decidetexto intervention, which is for smoking cessation, as a base to develop this vaping cessation intervention. So we had 18 meetings with the advisory board to provide feedback onto the text messages and to adapt them for vaping cessation. It was not as just replacing the word cigarette for e-cigarettes or smoking for vaping. We really took a deep dive into each one of those messages, making sure that they were appropriate for vaping. And something that I forgot to mention, but it is very important, the Community Advisory Board was very special in the sense that all of them have different vaping experiences, meaning we had people who have never used electronic cigarettes, we have people who are current users of electronic cigarettes, and some people who have used them but have already quit them. So all of them brought very interesting and unique perspectives into the development of this intervention. Our final product is a text messaging library that consists of 208 text messages. It is available in English and Spanish. And also something very important that the Community Advisory Board contributed to was the terminology that we needed to use for Spanish-speaking young adults. So there, to the best of our knowledge, there hasn't been kind of like some debriefing on what the terminology should be in Spanish. For example, some of the things that we learned was that the word vape should be translated into vaporizador, that vaping should be translated into vapear, and e-cigarette that should be translated into cigarrillo electrónico. These are just some of the terminology that they translated, but we also had terms like e-liquid, e-juice, vape shops, all of this terminology that might not be very natural in Spanish. We were able to come up with some proposed terminology by them. These are some of the best practices that we have learned by working with this community advisory board. The very first one is that we needed to have a bi-directional communication between the community advisory board members and the study team. And this was key for scheduling each one of the 18 meetings that we had. This was also crucial for making sure that all of their perspectives were incorporating into the development of the intervention. Another best practice was that we needed to spend time explaining what the study was about and also some of the risks of vaping and the benefits of quitting vaping. So this took a very long time, but we were able to get into a place in where the members of the Community Advisory Board had a clear understanding of what we were trying to do. As you can imagine, by bringing people with different perspectives, there were a couple of times in where we got into debate, and this is nothing but great. However, we also needed to use a democratic approach to come up with a consensus. It was also very important to understand what was the members' motivation to join the project. And like I mentioned before, some of them were already vape-free, so they wanted to share whatever experience they went through for quitting vaping. And there were also a lot of members from the Community Advisory Board who are aware of how this has been impacting the Latino community, and they really wanted to create an intervention that was effective for them. One of the other things is the creation of a safe space in where everybody had the opportunity to voice their concerns and make sure that the intervention was appropriate. Another key thing was to be compassionate. I remember that in one of the meetings in where we were gonna review text messages, This was right after the shooting in Texas. So as you can imagine, the young adults were very moved by what was happening and how it impacted the Latino community. So we had a very long discussion on all the things that are really affecting the Latino community. And just to mention something, I mean, that is beyond the scope of the study, but that is the right thing to do. And we should be prepared to have those conversations whenever we're engaging Latino young adults into research. And last but not least, we need to acknowledge the members' efforts and contribution to the study, meaning from monetary incentives to also including them in all the publications and poster presentations that we're doing. And with that, I finish the presentation. I want to acknowledge each one of my mentors, Drs. Cupertino, Osip, and McIntosh, and all of the study team that have helped us implement this study. A particularly shout out to Rafael Orfin, which is one of the members who have been key into implementing this study. And can I have the next one, please? And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them right now or send me an email or a tweet. And last but not least, can I have the last? Okay. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cartageno.
Thank you.
So we're going to open things up for questions. I really appreciate the fact that this was very community-based, not only in recruiting people, but you used the community to develop the program, which really has a grassroots effort. So let's see here. We do have a couple questions here. First one, are quit attempts higher due to text messaging motivational messages or for logistical reminders? And how many texts are usually recommended when you intervene?
So I'm going to respond that based on the study for smoking cessation, because the one on vaping cessation hasn't started. Something that we have learned over time, and this was because of multiple pilot studies that we did, for some reason, the right number was 3 messages per day. This was, in some studies, we used to text them 5 times a day, and people were telling us, no, that's too much. Sometimes it was 1 to 2 messages per day, and people were like, no, we need more. So we were able to identify that that was kind of like the sweet spot. Something also important to mention is that this is a longitudinal intervention. So whenever people need more support, it's around their quit date, previous to that, and kind of like the days after that. So that is whenever we interact the most with them. And the idea of the text messages is that the number of messages that we send decreases over time until the point in where they do not receive any more messages. It's not only about logistical reminders. I'm not a clinical psychologist by training, but that is why I have mentors who are clinical psychologists by training. So they are the ones who are making sure that all of the content of the text messages is consistent with some of the theories for behavioral change.
And are the text messages always coming from your team, or can individuals text you when they're particularly needing some help? Is it a bi-directional?
Yeah, that is a fascinating question. Everything is run through a text messaging company, so the messages are automated, but they do have some sort of tailoring. For example, some of the messages have the participant's name at the beginning of the message. It is also tailored to some of the preferences that I described in the beginning. For example, the coping strategies and some of the triggers that they may face. And one of the beauties of our intervention is that, yes, we prompt for interaction. And something that we have also learned through all of our studies is that the more someone interacts with us, the higher their chances of quitting smoking. We have also, this is getting very technical, I'm sorry. We have also been able to identify that Therapeutic Alliance, meaning how likely and how you perceive your relationship with the tobacco cessation counselor increases whenever people interact the most with us, which is, again, another mediator for people to quit smoking. So yes, this is bi-directional, and we do encourage people to interact with us.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from somebody who has a similar program in their area, and they want to know, how do you address the concerns about youth accessing texting cessation services without the knowledge of their parents? This has been a question that's come up in this other individual's area.
That is a very interesting question. So all of these are research studies. So they do require a consent form and people signing it. And all of these studies have been conducted among adults. So yeah, we haven't done any research, particularly among adolescents, that do require some sort of parental or guardian consent. But that is definitely something that people need to take into account whenever working with adolescents.
Okay. Next question addresses one of the slides you showed early on about the difference in the smoking rates in different countries, depending on the country of origin. And do you believe this is related to attitudes around smoking or vaping? What are some of your thoughts?
We need to do more research on it. We need to do more research on it because we conceptualize tobacco use as a biobehavioral addiction. So we do have the biological components, we also have the social components, and we also have the psychological components of it. We need to do research on ancestry, on nicotine metabolism to see if that explains some of the differences that we may see among Latinos depending on country of birth. But yeah, it's a very long answer to say that we need to do more research about it because we have not been able to identify some of these differences. And just to make the story more fascinating, for example, tobacco use has decreased among all Latino ethnicity groups except Puerto Ricans. Why? We don't know, and we need to do more research on it. There has not been a single study just looking at Puerto Ricans, which again is one of the groups with the highest smoking rates. So we need to do more research on it.
Okay. With a lot of things at the Lung Association, we're trying to get messages out, whether it's about vaccines, education. There's always a matter of building trust. And we know that the message is important, but the messenger is also important. So what are we doing to build trust with the Latino youth around such things as vaping cessation?
I have my own biases because I do community-based participatory research. But for me, something that has been always been key is involving the community in all phases of the research study. Particularly when it comes to recruitment, they are the ones who tell us where to go, when to go, what to say, how to present the study. And also among Latinos, we always have these connections, right? So they are always connecting us with the right people, making sure that we're meeting our recruitment goals. And it's not only about meeting recruitment goals, but also building trust. So that has been nothing but key to all of the studies that we have done, partnering with community members to make sure that the study is meeting our needs as researchers, but also the needs from the community. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Definitely. The community is important. This next question probably is going to be a long answer too, but we know there's over 400 chemicals in tobacco cigarettes, but the FDA still hasn't gotten manufacturers to tell us what, and these are the e-cigarettes. Manufacturers have not been able to tell us what are in these products. Do you think the FDA is going to make some headway in being able to get e-cigarettes listed? I mean, right now they're having very poor headway in getting them approved, so let alone listed. So just your thoughts on what the FDA can do further to help with this vaping situation.
Well, I guess the first clarifying, and hopefully I understood that correctly, cigarettes are known to have 7,000 chemicals, not 4,000, so the number is higher. When it comes to electronic cigarettes, the story is very tricky because we have different manufacturers, and then the e-liquids, some of them are homemade, and it is not regulated, so that makes the story very complicated. I do have to say that we need to do more research on toxicology and making sure what is in those e-liquids. But something important for the community to know is as you may have seen, there are a lot of electronic cigarettes that claim to be nicotine-free. However, when we do some studies on what is in those electronic cigarettes, we're finding that nicotine is in those, even though they claim to be nicotine-free. So I guess that talks about how not transparent the tobacco industry is when it comes to these products. And my personal opinion is that, yes, the FDA should be more involved into regulating them.
I think there may be one last question that we have time for.
Okay.
It's being, well, it looks like we don't have anything further. And I think we're just coming up on the end of our session as well. So I want to thank you not only for your presentation, but the ALA is proud to be supporting researchers like yourselves who are looking into important questions. As you mentioned, it's a long way to go, a lot more research to be done, but it's particularly important around areas where there's disparities, and we really appreciate what you're doing. So I'm going to turn this back to Nicole, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rizzo, for moderating this session, and thank you again so much to Dr. Cartageno for sharing this update on your award-winning research project. And congratulations on the successes you're already seeing with the current test groups. We greatly appreciate all that you're doing to support our shared mission to defeat vaping, particularly within targeted populations like Latino and Hispanic youth. A reminder to everyone, you can find more information, as Dr. Rizzo mentioned, about our vaping cessation efforts and resources at lung.org. We will now conclude this webcast, but please remember that questions we were unable to get to live will be answered in a follow-up email. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.